What if, instead of thinking of you as an employee, your boss in the workplace treated you like a valued customer? My guest and HR transformation expert, Dart Lindsley, knows that industrial age management practices are not working. He champions a new approach to how we design our work in organizations by treating work as a product that every organization builds and sells to their employees. Dart believes that by treating work as a product and employees as customers, organizations can build and deliver work that makes employees feel alive while delivering better results for all stakeholders. In this conversation, Dart and I have a wide-ranging discussion that includes his reframe of work as product, how his approach opens new possibilities and benefits for people and organizations, the problem with the working dead, lessons learned from over 25 years of working in people operations functions at Cisco Systems and Google, his background as a student of literature and how he applies what he learned from literature and writing to his corporate roles, and more. Dart thinks deeply about the world of work and how to bring more humanity and satisfaction to our work life and beyond. Let's dive in. Dart, welcome to Making Business Art. Thank you so much for being on here today.
Thank you very much for inviting me.
Yes. Well, I saw your background. I thought your background is so interesting. You started out your life as a writer, went on to do really interesting roles at Cisco Systems and Google. And nowadays you have a really interesting business with, I think, a very, interesting, it's like overused word, but I think a very thought-provoking reframe of HR and work. So we'll get into that in just a bit. But because you are a writer, I'm just very curious to first hear about if you can tell me about a story that you loved growing up.
A story that I loved. It's interesting. I couldn't read in the third grade. And nobody knew why it was. I didn't really know that I couldn't read. I don't remember knowing. But everybody else was worried about me. And it turned out, so they pulled me out of class and they started putting me in these special classes for kids who didn't know how to read. It turned out I needed glasses.
Huh.
And I got glasses, and all of a sudden I could read. And I immediately started reading whole authors. So I read immediately, this was the third grade, all of Ray Bradbury. And the next thing I read was Tolkien. And so I went from not being able to read Dr. Seuss to reading all of Tolkien in the fourth grade. And interestingly, of the two of them, I think Ray Bradbury had but again, it's not like a story, it's like the whole author. And so reading the whole author of Ray Bradbury, very humanist, very imaginative, very modern, had a big influence on me.
Yeah. Say a little bit more about that. Like what did it spark in you?
Well, the thing about Ray Bradbury, and it's funny because I may not have ever read him since the third grade, but the way he struck me at the time was that he was using science fiction not for its science fiction attributes, because he's not a hard science person. He was using it as a way to experiment with humanity. And I remembered one in particular that was about these people go to Mars. It's so rusty, right? They go to Mars and they find a weapon, and it just takes their inner self and makes it into reality for them. And so it was like these completely artificial plots. They didn't make any sense. They weren't logically sensical. They weren't scientifically sensical. But he used them to actually explore humanity. And I found that really compelling.
Huh. Interesting. Well, I can see that connecting the dots to to present day. We'll talk more about that. We'll get more into that in a little bit. But okay, well, so now let's step into the present. I'd like to start with this question. Where do you work and what do you get paid to do?
I am currently holding two roles. One of them is the host of Work for Humans, which is a podcast that's on which I bring together diverse thinkers to talk about how we might design work better. I'm also the CEO and co-founder of a work experience design firm called 11fold, which we founded just about 5 months ago, maybe 4 months ago. It's very young. The second one is what I get paid to do.
Well, what do you get paid to do?
To show companies, and in particular to show managers and their teams, how to think differently about work. And in particular, we argue that work is a product and that employees are customers. And as soon as you frame things that way, everything changes. And so if employees are customers, work is a product, all of a sudden managers and their teams are in a very different relationship. The managers become designers who are helping with the team to co-design an experience of work that the team members will love. And the managers become brokers, which is that they are standing between the traditional customer and the employee customer and making sure that value flows both directions, which is that the team is creating value for the traditional customer, but also that the work that the traditional customer provides to the team is allocated mindfully among the team members, and that they are working together to win the kind of work that they really want to subscribe to. And so it is a complete paradigm shift, and teams can't just hear what I just said and implement it. And so we coach teams and managers through the adoption of that philosophy.
Yeah. So tell me about The Working Dead. What's going on there with that situation?
Do you mean what's going on in the world with The Working Dead?
Yes.
So we've spent it's older than that, but certainly for the last 100 years, we have gotten into the habit of framing people at work as things, as inputs to production. It's a lot older than the present day. When you go back in time and you look at Roman slaves were called instrumentum in Latin, which meant tools. Later on, Victorian age, Irish laborers referred to as savages or beasts, less than human. Today, we use more polite language. We say assets, we say resources, who are acquired, we say human capital, but we're still using the language of less than human. And so the working dead is what happens to us when we are working in an environment that sees us as an input to production and treats us very much like capital equipment or resources or real estate, raw materials. That whole framing has completely limited the number of tools that are available to create great work. And today I came up with a word. I was talking to Alon Schwartz in Israel, and we came up with a word together, and it was scrap experience. So in process, I've never talked about this before because we just made it up this morning. In process design and process improvement, and if you're looking at manufacturing, you look for where the scrap is in the process. And scrap is considered waste. Well, scrap experience is the experiences we have that we don't want to have at work. And the truth is, there's an enormous amount of scrap experience. It's experiences that we have at work that we wish we didn't have. And a lot of it can be avoided. But I trace it all back fundamentally to the fact that we frame employees and the people who work at our companies as things.
Yeah. And I don't know if you remember this off the top of my head. I'm trying to recall this information, but the Gallup organization polls workers, the worker engagement's generally very low. like
I do know.
30% or below? And
30% are engaged.
Yeah.
30% are actively disengaged,
Mhm.
and the balance are sort of meh.
Yeah. And what's the number of the people who are already looking for work, like looking to leave for somewhere else? Like
I don't
half?
know that number. I do know that in the United States,
Mhm.
50 million people voluntarily leave work every year.
No.
That's out of a population of 250 million working people. So it's a very large percentage of people who just walk away. And of those, about 40% of them don't have an offer lined up. And so that's a real indicator of bad work. But the thing about especially the turnover numbers, I don't think. Okay, let's talk about engagement for just a second.
Mhm.
The word engagement was invented to say, what state of mind do I need you to be in order to make you more productive for me? That's engagement. And so even the word engagement is entirely framed around extraction.
Yeah.
What can I get from you for me? I'd like to expand that idea to say humans are here. There's a moral imperative to not just do for them what's necessary for them to give something to me, but to actually create experiences that they want to have.
Yeah. I mean, you spent a long time in the people function. What are one or two common reasons why people would leave in your own lived experience as a senior people function person?
They lose hope that it's ever going to get better.
Wow.
And so what bad is can be different things for different people. And what good looks like can be different things for different people. As long as they have hope that things might get better, they'll stay.
Right.
But when they come to the realization that things are not going to get better, they leave.
Wow.
And so it can certainly be bad management. So your direct manager is definitely a problem. It can be that a lot of your friends have left and gone to another company, and you want to go where your friends are. In fact, I did a study once where I interviewed everybody that we had hired, a lot of the people we'd hired in the last 6 months, and I asked them, how did you even learn about this role? Many of them had found it online. Many of them had seen it at a job fair or something, but almost all of them had also had a friend who left their old company and came to the new company. And they want to go, they're far more faithful to their people than they are to their company. And so sometimes it's for that. People leave because it's just not feeding them anymore. And again, you see, it's what feeds different people is completely different from person to person. And so the mindset, the industrial mindset that treats people as inputs to production wants to say, people want three things. It wants to simplify you, and it wants to look at you as a formula that can be solved like a math problem. But the truth is, when you really sit down and talk to people, and you ask them what they really want, it's very different from person to person. In fact, out of 100 people, when I've done surveys, only 2 are likely to want exactly the same thing, and even that is not completely accurate. So people want very different things. Some people want interesting puzzles to solve. Some people want a stage and lights to stand on. Some people just want their life to be structured by their job. Some people want to get out of the house. Some people want to build things and see what they've built. There's a very long list of what people want. And when they lose hope that they're going to be able to get it, that's when they leave.
Yeah. It just reminds me of instances where, I don't know if you've ever said this in your life. I have, some people that I know have. It's the proverbial, like, you can't pay me enough to do X, right? And that's what you're sharing. That's kind of like coming up for me. Even I'm recalling just people, kind of like high profile people who will say like the dream job was to go into Goldman Sachs, and they were there 2 weeks, and then they were like, oh no, I can't stick around. And then they leave. I think actually Peter Thiel's one of those people, oddly enough. But yeah, so it's not all. I mean, sometimes it's the money just for practical purposes, but it's not always the money, which is, I think, a story. There's lots of stories. Money is a very interesting animal that deserves its own kind of 2 hour plus conversation. So we can't talk about it right here.
But I have interviewed people about what they want from money.
Mm-hmm.
And so almost everybody wants to take care of their family. Yeah. They want to take care of themselves now and in retirement.
Right.
People want to buy other experiences with money. Some people keep score with money.
Mm-hmm.
So even money is not just money. Money is the things that money makes available to people. And so there's a lot of diversity in what people want from money as well.
Yeah. So in this rethinking of work, instead of HR, human resources, as a product to attract workers as customers, really thinking of workers as a customer base, tell me a little bit more about then the role of the manager and how does that change in your model, in your approach?
So when employees are customers, your business model changes. And you go from being a pipeline business where you bring in raw materials, you bring in people, you bring in capital equipment, you get them to work together to create some value for a customer. And you turn into a multi-sided business. And a multi-sided business is one that has two customers, both of whom need to be satisfied in order for the other to be satisfied. And this is a very old business model. And I'm going to take this to management in a second. Mm-hmm. But in this business model, it's everywhere, which is ad-based media are often multi-sided businesses. Savings and loans, you can actually hear both customers in the name. There's people who want to save money, and there's people who want to borrow money in a savings and loan. Uber, Airbnb, YouTube actually has 3 customers. So there's lots of businesses that have multiple customers, some of whom are acquired at a loss in many cases. So for instance, somebody who reads a newspaper might buy that newspaper for less than it's actually worth because the revenue-making customer is the advertiser. And so multiple customers, it's a very common business model, and it's an old business model. The Grand Bazaar is a multi-sided business, and it's 500 years old. There's the shopkeepers, and there's the shoppers. But the bazaar itself is actually owned by a third party, and the bazaar is a platform for those two customers to come together. So a manager of a multi-sided business is a fundamentally different thing. So in the traditional pipeline business, the manager's a controller. They stand above on the org chart. You can even see it as it manifests in the org chart. They stand at the top, and the people below them are in little boxes. And the metaphor of above and below, and this is from George Lakoff, who wrote a book called
Metaphors to Live By?
I can't remember the name of his book. But basically, in every language in the world, up means power and down means controlled. Up means health, down means sickness. Up means strong, down means weakness. And so that whole model puts the manager at the top in a controlling role. But in a multi-sided business, the structure is completely different. The manager's at the bottom, and they are not controlling, they are orchestrating. And they're orchestrating a flow of value that's going 2 directions. And the nature of that orchestration works something like this. If I'm a manager, and you are on my team, I need to treat you as a customer and do a need-finding exercise with you where I interview you about what you really want uniquely from work. And once I understand what you want and what the other team members want, and ideally every team member knows what each other wants from work, all of a sudden I'm in a position where I can start to try to win the kind of work that you really want. And we as a team are going to work together to win that kind of work. And in order to do that, we're really going to have to produce a fantastic product for the kind of customers we want to win. But when we win that work from whatever our customer is, now a part of my role as a manager is to allocate that work with mindfulness about what each member of the team really wants. And so and to then monitor whether or not each person is continuing to get the kind of work that they find most rewarding. And if they don't, then a manager intervenes. But it's not a controlling role anymore. It's an orchestration role. It's a broker role, so you're brokering between these two different customers, and it's a design role, which is that you're helping to design, you're co-designing the experience of work with the members of the team.
Yeah. Interestingly, this makes me think of just my own life learnings in, say, like in romantic relationships, where at some point I figured out that the key to having a really good relationship, well, one key, I'm not going to say like the key, but one key is the matching of wants. If you both want generally the same things, it's generally going to go pretty well. And I think that's true in my current relationship of 10 years. That's just been, a very, very natural, kind of like very easy match. We have a really easy time being together. But I'm hearing that also in your explanation. And I mean, it makes total sense too. I think there's just a lot less resistance and emotional labor and exhaustion when you're just matching people with what they want.
And it takes mindfulness, but it's free.
Yeah.
Which is, if I have two people on my team who both like to solve puzzles, and so now I'm a puzzle provider, and I'm winning the kind of puzzles that they really want to solve. So one of them might like one kind of puzzle, and one of them likes another kind. So I had two people on my team. One liked little Rubik's Cube financial puzzles that had a math component, but were very contained. And the other one liked big, greenfield, never been solved before puzzles or problems. And if I just allocated puzzles at random between them without understanding what each of them liked, there would be a lot of scrap experience. I will have wasted an opportunity to actually create some value in the world and to create some value in the company. But if I'm mindful and I'm able to allocate that work to them with an understanding of what each of them likes, it's pure benefit for everybody.
Yeah. The other thing this makes me think of is I've seen, and this is like a while back, I've seen a handful of interviews with like the original engineering team of the Apple computer, the Mac. And for whatever the imperfections of the management at that time, etc., they all invariably say something to the effect of like, oh, I did the work of my life. And you can see like a sparkle in their eye.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just such a good feeling. It's just such a good feeling just to see that sparkle in the eye, but also the really good feeling of like, oh, wow, when you really get to express your talent, express your ability fully, but being engaged in work that really draws that out of you.
And I want to emphasize both the large scale nature of that and the very small scale nature. Mm-hmm. So large scale, one time I had somebody on my team two people on my team actually, who really wanted to be doing creative work, and we were doing mostly analytical work. And so we asked ourselves, our team was never going to win the kind of work that they were going to find really rewarding. And so we said, are there any adjacent services that our team could expand into that might satisfy, that might win us the kind of work that you really want to do? And so we looked around and we said we could go from process improvement to employee experience design. So we actually were looking at employee experience research. And we put out a sign inside the company saying, look, we do this now, to see if there was any market for it. And it turned out there was a market for it. And we started to win that kind of work. And one of those people did that for the next 8 years until she retired. And so we created the market. We showed the people that there was value for this product that we were selling. We won the work. And that's the large-scale example of a manager's role of winning the kind of work that people really want to do. But there's a really small-scale one, and it happened this week on my team, which is on a weekly basis, we look at how rewarding each category of work is for each person. And one person on the team, their score for team meetings had gone to yellow. We're like, what's going on with team meetings? And what he said is, I just don't feel like I'm providing any value in those meetings. Most of the time we're talking about finances. That's not what I do. And I just feel like I'm wasting your time. I feel like I'm wasting my time. And so what we did is we switched the agenda on all our meetings so that person's, the part that was important to that person went first in the meeting. And then that person leaves the meeting, and we talk about the financials and everything else. And so all we had to do was know, and we were able to take that category of work for that person and make it better.
Yeah.
It was, not only was it free, it saved money, because this was somebody we were paying hourly,
Right.
and this person was unhappy because if they're not being productive, they're not happy.
Yeah. So tell me a little more about how do you articulate the potential benefits of this model, of this approach to work to the stakeholders when you're speaking to leaders or like project sponsors? How are you articulating the benefits to them?
I'm going to say I don't love how we articulate the benefits, and there's two reasons.
It's hard to do.
The biggest reason is that the easiest way to articulate the benefits is to say we're going to reduce turnover and we're going to increase engagement. And when we increase engagement, it's going to be better for your company. That's all true. It starts from the idea that your company just doesn't want to be bad. And the thing is that if you want to have a great company, let's take an example of a chef. A chef who doesn't want to be bad might be really good at not giving you food poisoning. But you can be extraordinarily good at not giving people food poisoning and not a great chef. In fact, no matter how hard you try to not give the people food poisoning, you're never going to be a great chef. And so a sales pitch that starts from let's not be bad is never going to create the kind of extraordinary work experience that you'd want to have. So that's a part, but it's true. I can articulate that. I can actually point to examples where turnover's gone down when people start using this practice. I can point to examples of manager scores going way up. The better pitch, and it's the harder pitch, is what kind of a legacy do you really want to leave? What kind of a company do you want to build? Do you want to build a company that's going to shine, that's going to benefit every member of it more than any other company? Do you want it to be able to shine not just while you're here, but once you leave? That's a much more encouraging. That's the kind of pitch that leads to extraordinary companies and working with the kind of companies that want to be amazing. So I also believe that there's a moral argument. And it's very interesting how few business books actually use the word morality. The traditional model says that I'm only going to invest in your experience if I can actually prove that it's traceable to shareholder value. And in fact, I'm going to tell you, I was the high priest of that model for a decade when I first joined business. And it's just because that's what everybody was talking about was shareholder value, and you needed traceability to shareholder value. And I bought it, and I was in charge for some of that time for the project portfolio in that company. And I would look at the projects that came in, and I would ask myself, they were all good projects, they were all interesting projects, but the ones that applied to employee experience, I wouldn't invest in. And the reason is, there was this other project over here, which was outsourcing. And I knew for sure that was going to reduce our costs. And this other one around experience, it was mushy, and I couldn't really prove it. And so it's not that I didn't think it was a good project, I just wasn't going to invest in it over the other projects. Well, the problem with that philosophy that I think is a moral problem is the only reason I'm investing in your experience is because I think it's going to produce value for me. If I could make you miserable and it produced value for me, that would be fine. So if the assumption is that the only reason I'm ever going to invest in a human's experience of their life is because of what I'm going to get from it, then if I can get the same thing by treating you badly, I will. And so that for me started to become the untenable thing. At least it was always something that, even though I was preaching it, I kept looking at it and saying, this is a moral issue that makes me uncomfortable.
Yeah. I mean, were there other kind of co-occurring key pains or problems that you were observing in organizations that compelled to develop this approach that you have with 11-fold now?
Well, the reason, things didn't make sense. And let me see if I can show a couple. Well, here's one example of something that didn't make sense. I conducted exit interviews with some of the most senior HR people at the company I was working for at the time. And so these were vice presidents. They were very successful. And I'd always thought that they were happy. And in their exit interview, I asked them, tell me about your career. And they were bitter, really bitter. And they were bitter in part, they said, because they didn't feel like they'd gotten anything done, which I thought was really interesting. They felt like they'd wasted their life trying to make a difference, and they hadn't. Another discrepancy is that we kept throwing money at employee experience, and yet people weren't happy. And the third thing is, I saw employee experience teams get stood up, live for about 2 years, and die. And then we'd say, you know what, we really need somebody to focus on employee experience. And we'd stand up a new team. These, by the way, are companies with quite a bit of money. Mm-hmm. We'd stand up a new team, they'd live for about 2 years, and then they'd die. Why was that? It's partially because we thought employee experience was a good idea, but we wouldn't fund it. And why not? We had a very confused idea about employer brand. We'd stand up an employer brand team, and they thought it was about essentially a communications role. We're going to tell people how great we are. And it was usually a part of recruiting. And so the employer brand function was the function that was supposed to, as a part of recruiting, create marketing materials that sold the company. But a marketing strategy is not about talk. Real marketing, to quote a Harvard business professor, sales gets rid of stuff you have. Marketing makes sure that they have stuff they can get rid of. And so marketing is not just about talk. Marketing is about creating the kind of product that people really want. And company after company that I saw was failing to do that. And so there was just, before there's a paradigm change, a lot of things stop adding up. Evidence starts to pile up that there's something that's not right with the theory because the theory is not creating the kind of results that you really want. And the more I looked at the way things were functioning, the more I saw that things weren't adding up.
Yeah.
Companies weren't getting what they wanted from what they were investing in the workforce.
Well, when I went to business school, I had the fortune of studying with Professor Heather Elms, who had been a mentee of Professor Edward Freeman at the Darden Business School in University of Virginia. And he's known for this like stakeholder theory or stakeholder approach to business, kind of competing in a more obscure way, unfortunately, with the shareholder approach. And something that she would repeat to us all the time is something you hear out in the wilderness is like, oh, you're legally required to generate shareholder returns. And she said that there's no law around that. So, well, even laws, we could argue about that, but it's just a story, right? It's just a narrative that accrues value to a certain category of stakeholder. And I think an organization can be without a leader for a month, 2 or 3 and work fine. But if all the employees leave, then that organization's out of business.
That's right.
So who's really providing value? So it's like, I think the formula, the way that we look at how value is created and who's creating value and to whom the rewards should accrue in what distribution, I think that's really off at the moment. But riffing off that, I'm just curious. So now that you have 11-fold, And you've been doing this people function for a while, but now that you're having conversations with potential leads, approaching clients, etc., what are some common organizational hurdles you're encountering as you're trying to help them like reimagine work as product? Like what are 2 or 3 common things that you're encountering right away?
I think it's important to say something about the root cause of the traditional model. The traditional model is a natural byproduct of how human attention works. So if I'm the CEO of a company, I am intensely focused on my customer and my traditional customers, so the customer that's going to provide me with revenue. Mm-hmm. So I'm intensely focused on that as a challenge, and that's not a mistake. That is an incredibly important thing to do. And as the company grows, I start looking at the people in my organization with less and less detail. So in the same way that a city map has more detail than a state map, mm-hmm. when the company is small, I'm looking at them like a city map. In fact, I might even be at street view where I'm looking house to house and I can see every member of every employee inside my company. But as the company grows, I start to lose that detail. And as I zoom out, as the employee population grows, the detail gets to the point where the only way I can interact with the people in my organization is through numbers. So I can count them, I can classify them, I can categorize them, and I start hiring people who are going to make those numbers work out. And they're going to look at the cost of the workforce, and they're going to talk about the productivity of the workforce. But basically what's happened is I've stopped being able to pay attention to the unique individuals inside my organization, and I start thinking about it as a formula that mm-hmm. needs to be balanced. This happens to governments as well. It's a great book called Seeing Like a State by James Scott, and it talks all about how governments make a mistake when they do that. They start to see the country as a formula that needs to be balanced. That's step one. They then try to apply those models to the population, and the population is way more complex than the models. And they get annoyed with that. And then they try to force the population into the models. And it's that last step, especially combined with authoritarianism, where all of a sudden you're forcing people to do things that are completely unnatural. Well, the same thing happens in companies. And so because of that accidental distance, because leaders are appropriately facing toward a customer who's the revenue generating customer, they turn their backs on the employees mentally and start to look at them as an equation. Well, HR has built itself to serve that mental model. And as it has built itself to serve that mental model, it needs to sell productivity, and it's become a procurement function. And it's become a maintenance function of an input to production. And honestly, I really believe that's why the HR leaders that I talked to when they were leaving the company were so bitter, was that mm-hmm. they had become a servant to a mental model that treated people like things.
Yeah.
Okay, so now here comes 11-fold, my company, and we come into a company. Who are we going to talk to? There are 3 levels of HR, I would say. One level of HR is we're all about productive workforce. We're treating people like inputs. The second level says, no, actually, we realize that we are customer-facing and that HR services are customer-facing, and we're going to take on a product mindset and a design mindset, and we're going to start creating HR services that people love. What's been completely missed in that discussion is that people don't come to work for HR services. They come to work for great work. And there are very few companies who are actually looking at work itself as something that needs to be improved. And so when people leave companies, they don't leave because the HR services weren't great, usually. They don't leave because the benefits portal was not intuitive. They And they don't come to work for yoga or snacks or a great gym. They can get those elsewhere. What really is at the core of this is great work. And companies like mine who are selling the idea that work itself can be better, it tends to fall outside of the scope of HR. Because HR is not scoped to solve for work wherever it sits. They're not generally scoped to go in and solve, for instance, the call center experience of work or the software engineering experience of work. And so that's one problem, is that there's that the question of who do you sell to? Well, there's a couple of different groups that we can sell to. We can sell directly to line managers. And line managers get it. Not all of them, but a lot of them do. And the reason is that they've been put into an impossible situation for their whole careers, which is that the company is giving them the tools to treat their people like things. And they're right. They can see their people right there. They can see that they're not things. They're humans, and those humans are complaining to them about being treated like things. Performance management is one of those things. Job titles are ways to categorize you so that I can count you better. I'm going to give you a box to sit in, and I'm going to tell you what the skills are in that box, and then I'm going to reward you for becoming more like the skills that are in that box. So all of these things, managers are put into an incredibly difficult situation, and they don't like it. Yeah. And when you start to give them the tools and the mental models to actually start thinking about this differently, they are relieved. They are totally relieved. Most of them.
Yeah.
Founders are great. Founders understand business models. They understand that because they have a business model, they set up a business model. And they're in a position with enough power to actually say, you know what, we're going to change our business model. We're going to recognize employees as a whole other business. And work is a product that we're selling. Consulting companies are pretty good. And consulting companies are pretty good because they already know that the consultants that they field are the direct interface with the customer. And so they already recognize that employees are not just a means to an end. So, but there are objections. There are a lot of objections to it. And one of the objections that people say goes something like this. Sure, employee experience is really important, but if you focus on the inside of the company, you're going to lose focus on what really matters, which is the external customer, is what they say. And I'm like, well, you're right that it would be very bad business to focus on something, to not focus on your customer. But if employees are really customers, then it would be very bad business not to focus on that customer. And people say, let's not focus on the inside of the company. And I ask, well, why do we say that employees are inside the company? They're not. I mean, they're inside the walls, but they stand apart from the company and they observe it and they judge their experience every day, and they can leave whenever they want. And they can either leave by quitting or they can leave by just not paying attention today.
Yeah. I mean, really, the company, quote unquote, I mean, it's just a legal fiction. It doesn't really exist. It's just a group
Correct.
of people collaborating.
It's a group of people.
And
so that's one objection. Another objection is, especially after I've explained how much diversity there is and what people really want from work, people are like, how on earth are we going to scale a product of work where everybody wants something different? And the answer to that is you already have the tools for scale, which is you have a management staff. And if the management staff can pick up these tools, you've got all the tools for scale that you need. So there are objections. People who have implemented it, however, have found that most of those objections are not a problem.
Yeah. Well, something I have some degree of conviction on is that there is no lack of tools. I think what really gets in the way sometimes is just stories and thinking and ways of being. Kind of started to distinguish that some time ago, especially when I was in business school. And I think we're very quick to blame the tool, like PowerPoint doesn't work or people hate this or that or the other. But it's just a tool. So what does that say about the tool wielder? I think PowerPoint can be an excellent tool in the hands of somebody that has like good visual design skills and knows how to organize information and all the other skills required to make a really effective visual presentation. But yeah, and something that your story is making me think of is Starbucks. I'm curious to look into just the kind of the journey of Starbucks lately, because over time I just noticed that Starbucks, one day I remember I went into one, and I don't frequent Starbucks all that much, but it was on a road trip or something where I was traveling, and I stepped into one and there was like no furniture and there were like no condiments, like the sugar and all of that. Like you had to ask for it. And they just felt really weird. And then over time, the revenues dropped and then they went into panic mode, and then they hired this new CEO, this new guy. And the grand strategy is what? Simplify the menu, make it more human. They want to bring the furniture back. So they're just kind of coming back to the beginning of Howard Schultz, from at least the story as he tells it, is he wanted to make this ambiance like the Italian coffee house where you can go there and relax and drink something. And last time I went to Starbucks, now they have the ceramic mugs. I was meeting up with a friend and it was like, oh, it's nice. You can get a drink in a ceramic mug and sit down and spend some time connecting with somebody. Yeah, so that's coming up for me. It's just kind of going back to being more human instead of being more this efficiency-driven, machine-like way of operating that just alienated customers altogether.
Yes, and a part of this philosophy, the 11-fold we call it multi-sided management, is that you can't interact with large groups of people in a human way. Humanity happens human to human. It doesn't happen human to 10,000 humans. And
what about your favorite
although
rock
I
band,
might
though?
be able to communicate to 10,000 humans, I cannot comprehend 10,000 humans.
Yes.
Every human in the 10,000 is bigger than my whole company, in that their mind is more complex and more diverse. And so I may be able to transmit to 10,000, but I can't comprehend 10,000. And so if you really, this is part of the reason why the management philosophy is way down at the manager and the teams, and is a partnership between managers and teams. And it's because only the manager is close enough to the teams to see them whole and to interact with them as a whole human to a whole human. And anytime you put a system between two people, now I'm going to see you through a computer. In order for a representation of you to make it into the computer, you've lost all detail. Computers, all systems, all technology, except actually videos, actually pretty good. But all technology that turns you into data fails to comprehend you as a whole human.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the many limitations now with a number of technologies, AI included, is that language is really a technology, a tool for pointing towards oftentimes our internal states. Like all the songs that you liked when you were a teenager, it was about falling in love, or you had the hots for somebody, or somebody dumped you, or something like that. And it really spoke to our lived experiences, which is our internal states. And I think all this datafication, there's a default to measuring what's easily measurable.
Correct.
And a willful ignorance as to then what really makes for a very meaningful experience and what connects with people. And I think that, among other factors, is what sometimes makes failed businesses go downhill, be it that they fail or they're just like your internet service provider that most people hate because they're a monopoly, so you don't have a choice. But yeah, it just depends the kind of life that you want to live. Like you were saying, these executives that you were interviewing on the way out. Dart, we've spoken about the present day, your present day work. I want to step into the time machine and rewind. I go back to the time where you were starting your adult life. And I know you majored in literature and writing in undergrad and grad school. What drew you to pursue that discipline?
Some of it was just trial and error.
Okay.
I started off as a philosophy major, and then I became a biology major, and then an anthropology major, and then I almost graduated in economics. And the problem that I found in each of those studies was that I was pretty good. I was okay. But I dropped out for a little while, and I hitchhiked around Mexico on a spearfishing trip, and I was on a train traveling through Mexico, and I thought, what am I actually good at? What am I good at? And what do I love? And I sat there thinking about that, and I said, at that point I was a boxer. I'm like, well, I'm good at hitting people. That doesn't seem very marketable. I was a spear fisherman. I was good at spearing fish. That didn't seem like it was, but I looked across and I said, I'm a really good reader. And every test I'd ever taken, and also everything pointed to the fact that I'm good with language. And so I sat there thinking about that, and I said, I really think I should point my life in the thing that I'm most passionate about and that I'm most talented at. Now, I was missing a point there, which is that being talented at reading is not the same thing as being talented as writing. But I hadn't figured that out yet. And I thought to myself, you know what? I'd been also working at construction in the summer, and I was thinking I was a very practical person. I'm thinking I'm going to go back and I'm going to show all these artists. I'm going to become a writer, and I'm going to show all these artists what practicality is. And I thought I was going to go back, and I thought I was going to go to the university, and I was going to enter into the creative writing program. Literature falls under creative writing, but I was really interested in the writing part of it. And so I thought I was going to be like the practical writer, and I immediately became the most effete, artistic, highbrow experimentalist on the planet. And I rapidly got interested in abstract expressionist prose.
So it's like you got a new pair of glasses all over again, like from the third grade.
Hey, that's exactly right. What I did is I wanted to test out new forms of fiction. There's very tried and true forms of fiction, and I wanted to test out new ones. And so I started working in experimental fiction, and which nobody really wants to read. And I dove into that. And I'm quite proud of the work I developed. It's just not easy reading. Yep. Some of it's very good, but it's not a traditional story.
So what aspect of the craft was most challenging or formative for you? Like, what did you grapple with the most in trying to master it?
The blank page. And I actually say that this is the best thing that artists can bring into the rest of their lives, which is, that's especially true if you're an experimentalist like I was, which is you face a blank page and it could be anything. And the question becomes, where do you even start? And so my parents were scientists. And so I came out of a very rationalist mental world. And that's part of the reason why I did all those things before I went into writing, is because I was very steeped in scientific method and rationalist ideas. All of a sudden, on a blank page, the only thing that you can trust is your opinion. And so being able to sit there and say, I'm going to set out and I'm going to discover what it is that I want to create from nothing is an incredibly wholesome exercise. And it's an exercise I've been very lucky to work with some of the smartest people on the planet at Cisco Systems and at Google. And they have not necessarily developed the part of their brain that can make decisions based upon aesthetic opinion starting from nothing. It's a very different skill set. And it's a very different part of your mind. And so that, for me, was the greatest gift.
Yeah. I mean, that makes me think of, I was so shocked the first time I had a conversation with somebody, this is like over 20 years ago now, who was explaining, who's like a jazz, he plays jazz and improv, etc. And then he was explaining to me how some classically trained people, they need the sheet in front of them. They can be extremely skilled at playing, but if they don't have the sheet with the music in front of them, they can't play. Or
Right.
or they can't improvise. You just can't ask them, like, just make something up. They just can't for whatever reason. And then on the other end, the jazz improvised musician, if you give them a sheet of music and you're like, follow this, they also can't deal with that. It's too, it's too constrained. And I just thought, like, at the time I was like, yeah, music, you can do whatever, you play an instrument, you do whatever you want. And I didn't know of this like dichotomy, right? It makes me think of that a little bit. That's really interesting.
It is that way. In fact, one of my favorite painters, Bob Irwin, he stopped painting one day. He stopped producing work. And he went into his studio and he took a blank canvas and he painted a single line down the middle. And then he'd erase it. And then he'd do another line. And then he'd erase it. And he spent a year just drawing one line and then erasing it. And asking the question, when do I put paint to canvas that makes the canvas better? And the thing is that when you start with nothing and you set out to create something new, you just start. And you start putting things down on paper. And the way I used to write when I was doing the deepest abstract expressionist stuff was I would type a whole page, and then I'd read the whole page to myself. I'd pick one word. I was like, that word is right. And I'd move it on to the next page. And I'd write a whole page, and then I'd say, okay, those two words, I want them to be in this. And I'd move it over. And I'd keep exploring, and then it would start to become sentences. And then I'd say, that sentence has something to it. It's not right, but it gets to go on to the next page. And I would do this over and over. Oh my God, it was laborious. And it doesn't produce a lot of pages. I worked for 6 months to create 3 pages. And yet, every single word of those 3 pages is exactly right. And it stands in space as an invention that's completely unique.
So, well, let me ask you this. So externally, the data shows that you produced X number of pages, that you're saying you have this perception or this belief that it wasn't very productive. Internally, what was the internal change for you? Like, what was the crucible of generating those pages with this approach to selecting the words? Did something change for you inside in some way?
Oh gosh, that's such a complicated question. Let me see if I can answer it. I knew I had made something beautiful.
You made art.
And one of the things I said at the time was, if you could invent a birch tree, you would. Just because they're beautiful. And the way I used to write, and for a long time, at first when I very first started writing, I said, I thought a lot about the audience, and I thought a lot about what lots of people would like. And I thought about making something that would be appealing to a broad audience. Towards the end of when I started getting into the abstract expressionist work, I would say, what would a star like? And I didn't mean a star like a twinkly thing in the sky. I mean a raging ball of nuclear fusion. The most massive thing I could think of. If I was writing for that, what would I write? And so you can see that those are 2 different ways of making decisions on a white page. Mm-hmm. One way of making decisions is, what is the lowest common denominator going to want? It's because I'm looking for mass appeal. And over time saying, no, the way I'm going to make decisions on the page is I'm going to write to some absolute thing that I can't even comprehend. So then it's you and the page. And if you have to think about who's it's for, you think about something that's incomprehensibly large.
Yeah. Makes me think of a story from Rick Rubin where he was working with Johnny Cash, and there was a song, I forget what the song was, but they changed the framing of the song where he asked Johnny Cash, or he suggested to Johnny Cash, like, well, what if you make this song, you're like, it's an offering to God, like instead of an audience or something. And it changed the vibe of the song. And then that was the song that was released, and it resonated with people.
That's exactly
Makes me think
right.
of that.
That's exactly what I was doing. Just raised by scientists, I'm an atheist, and so I chose stars. But if I could have chosen God, I would have, because that's what I was trying for. I was trying for the big thing.
Have you ever wept while writing something?
I've definitely wept while reading something. While writing something, no.
Okay.
There's a technique that I learned writing, and actually we'll get to it eventually. I applied in business too. It's really hard to describe. Here's what it feels like. I'm sitting there looking at a blank page, and I want to find the real thing that needs to be there. And the way I think of it is that at the surface of the water is my intellect. And always floating at the surface of the water way up here in my intellect. But imagine if you blow out all of your breath and you sink to the bottom of the pool. And you just allow yourself to sink to the bottom of the pool. That is something deeper in you than the intellect. And I would feel it in my chest. I would feel that I was going from my head to just about where my neck is, just where my neck attaches to the torso. And right there, I would just sit there. And it had to do with breath. It was weird. It had to do with like breathing out and just saying, what's the signal that I can hear from the part of me that is not my intellect right now? And if I can just quiet myself and sink down into that, what do I find that I can bring forward? Yeah. I never talk about this, by the way. I never talk about it. And I hardly even talk about it with writers, but I definitely don't talk about it in the business world. But I believe that thing that I was engaging with is a part of the mind that is very ancient. It's not all where the words are. It doesn't start from the words. It doesn't start from language. It starts way deeper than that.
Yeah. That I'm resonating with that because that's an approach that I call for myself, like digging for the deeper truth.
Yep.
And when you strike the deeper truth, it's like it's a body sensation in your body, like in your bones. You're like, there it is. And there's a whole lot of emotion usually that's around it.
And a part of the reason why I went onto that riff from Have I Ever Wept While Writing is the answer is no, in part because it's so meditative. It's so calm at the bottom of the pool. Although I also would sometimes, while I was writing like that, I would find myself in the corner of the room, standing up, clapping my hands really fast, like this, just like with just nervous energy. And I go, oh, no, I have to go back to the typewriter. So weird things would happen, but it wasn't weeping.
Yeah. Well, tell me like one thing that really impresses you in the writing of others, like in terms of technique or what's there, like the narrative, how it's told. Just pick one thing that you're impressed by when.
I have often asked myself how any human being could write The Light in August by William Faulkner. Like, how could any human being create something of such complexity and richness. And I realized, one word at a time, like anybody else. And that gave me a lot of hope, right? Which is that you look at some works of art and you just say, how on earth could anybody do that? And the answer is, bit by bit.
Yeah. Well, you spent time in grad school, etc., studying literature and writing. I mean, what's your take on what does a really good story spark in people? What's your take on that?
I think there's a lot of different kinds of stories. They spark different things. And honestly, a lot of what I read these days is just facilitated daydreaming. And facilitated daydreaming is all about just sparking dopamine, just like a video game or something like that. That's not great art. Great art is beautiful. And so great art is about beauty. And to me, beauty can be ugly. So ugly can be beautiful. And so the combination of discord and harmony, places where the writing is discordant, places where it's harmonious, all of those things can come together to make beauty. And so, but I mean, the problem with saying beauty is that, like, it doesn't really tell us anything. You just know it when you see it. It's not like a component of something. It's the whole thing.
Yeah. Well, let me do another pass here from another angle. Like, what would you say are some key elements to make writing effective at connecting with and moving readers? It doesn't have to be some grand truth, but for you, in your lived experience and opinion, how do you come at that question?
You listened to my interview with John Truby. And John Truby was a screenwriter. And I talked to him about the stories we live at work. And a part of what we talked about was human transformation. So watching a character go from one place to another and change their state completely, I would say is one of the most fundamental things. So getting as much of a whole human into the story and then having that human go through a transformation to become something else.
Yeah. Well, we spent time exploring your time at school and as a writer, but then you spent like 19 years at Cisco Systems and 7 years at Google in a variety of roles, so spanning operations and business architecture, HR functions, and some other things mixed in between. What are like 2 or 3 key lessons learned from those experiences? Like, if you distill that all down, what's top of mind for you?
Those are challenging questions. I like them. I like them as questions because they're definitely you have to jump off into this enormous ocean and say, what's the lesson from the ocean? I mean, one of my lessons was, it's okay to be weird, which is that, and I tell this to students when I speak at universities, which is that people think that in order to work in a corporation, you have to be a drone. And I thought that, especially coming from the arts, I thought, I've got to make money now because we have kids. And so I'm going to go into a corporation and I'm going to have to be a drone. But the truth is, especially large corporations, they need specialists. They need people who are specialists. And that's one of the advantages that large corporations have, is that they can actually have specialists who are the best in their field. Well, specialist is synonymous with weird. And so after working in corporations, it took me a while to figure out, like 8 years, I started to say to myself, what's the weird me that this company wants? And I embraced it.
Yeah.
So that's one. Another big lesson for me, because I worked in big companies, and it's a special problem space. But I learned the lesson of how to influence large systems. And the biggest technique for me was, and this is where the artistic background came into play, is the way I say it is I say you put your hands up to the company and you feel the heat. You feel where it wants to go. And that thing of putting your hands up to the heat, it's the same thing I was talking about. You're listening to a part of yourself that can feel what the company wants, where it wants to go. And then you use its energy, you channel its energy toward where it should go. And it's a lot like sailing, which is that sailboats don't just run with the wind. They take the energy of the wind, and then they have a keel and a rudder, and they are able to channel that into the direction that they want to go. And so it was this technique of feeling the zeitgeist, knowing where it naturally wanted to pull, and then using that energy to take the company someplace else. And the other thing I learned, and it's led to a lot of my current work, is that systems that exist have evolved to a self-reinforcing equilibrium. And this is really geeky, but you can't change a system by hitting it with a hammer. It just perturbs the system briefly and it goes back to equilibrium. If you want to change a system, a large system like a corporation, you have to push on it in a different way. And I believe that you need to change the mental model. You need to actually get in and change the assumptions upon which the system is founded. And that happens really deep. It happens at mental model and even below that at values. And so when we were talking earlier about the morality of how you treat people at work, that went all the way down to values. But when we're talking about employees as customers and all companies being multi-sided businesses, that's at the level of mental model. And so when I make an argument about why we should change our mental model, you can dig one layer deeper and say, well, you can stay with the existing mental model and say it'll make you more money. Or you can take a level deeper and you can say it's the right thing to do. And both of those are true. Good news is doing the right thing will make you more money. But setting out to make more money will not necessarily make you lead to doing the right thing. Or, for that matter, in many cases, making more money. So anyway, this idea that if you're going to transform a system in a sustainable way, you can't just stand at the side and yell at it. You have to get down there at the level of mental model and at the level of values and transform it.
So, I mean, looking back, you mentioned that you used your technique to like check in with yourself to kind of dive into that emotion, deeper space. Were there other ways that your background in writing shaped your career?
Yes.
At these two companies?
Yes.
Can you just give me a couple of brushstrokes on that?
Yes. So in literature, in the study of literature, you do something called close reading. And a close reading is just like what it sounds. You read really closely, sentence by sentence, and you listen for the true meaning of that sentence, and you draw it out into a hypothesis about or an idea that you can write about the story. You can do a close reading of the language that is flowing through a company. And if you do that close reading, you can hear the mental model that is animating the system. And you'll hear it in the metaphors that are used. And so when people talk about headquarters, it means that the center of the company, that the leadership of the company is the center. But the truth is the customers are at the edge. Why isn't that the center? The customers, the whole company should be wrapped around the customers, not wrapped around the headquarters. And so you can listen to this language, you can listen to the way people are talking about employees, and you can listen to them saying asset or resource. In fact, it's considered a noble thing to say. You know what? Employees are our most important asset. But you do a close reading of that, and that the mental model that's still being used is an owned thing that has value to me. And so
Wait, so let me just make a distinction, just tease out a distinction here. Because in your experience, I'm hearing that you're reading like the culture. I studied anthropology, so that's my lens. You're reading the culture, but does that necessarily match the org chart or the paperwork and what's the posters on the wall, or is it usually different? Like what's been your own experience?
Well, I mean, I would argue that the org chart is an artifact that has a metaphor baked into it, and so the org chart is just another thing that you can do a close read of.
Yeah, but does it reflect this living culture that you're doing a deep reading on, or is it just kind of BS?
Many of these artifacts are aspirational, and so they're not the reality, but they're things that people hope are true. But many of them are not aspirational, and people make them true. And I also think that you see this. I will tell you something that I think I have almost a religious belief in. I've worked a lot on data modeling. Data modeling is very close to God, right? You're very close to the deepest, kernel of how we see the world. And so you can do a close reading of a data model and get an understanding of what the mental models are that animate it, that created it. And I'll just give you an example of that, which is we have job codes. We associate the skills that are required for that job code, we associate them with the job code. And that's so that we can match the job to somebody else who has the same attributes. So with the skills that are needed to do the work, I'm going to associate a bunch of skills to you, and I'm going to use the skills associated to you and the skills associated to this job to make a match. Where in that is the part of the data model that says what rewards you're going to get from that work, the part that you're really going to enjoy? We don't have the data model that talks about what makes that work great for you. Now, if you go to Amazon and you look at a product on Amazon, it tells you what it has for you. It tells you its specifications. And in the data model of a shopping experience, you actually have the attributes of the thing that you're going to want. But when we have a data model about work, we don't have those attributes. And so you can see that even down deep in the data model, we are neglecting the needs of people.
Yeah. Well, Dart, this project is called Making Business Art. What comes up for you when you hear that phrase? What meaning do you make of that?
Through my career, I have arrived at a whole new artistic medium. And it's large systems. So when large systems are running and we interact with them because we become a part of that system, they create experiences for us. And that makes them an artistic medium. And you can see large systems and how they fail or succeed as artistic media. And it's first of all, it's an incredibly powerful medium. If you can be successful in that medium, it's incredibly powerful. But think about going through TSA at the airport. That's a large system that's creating an experience for you. And it is not a very beautifully designed, that system does not create a beautiful experience. One time when I was in a hospital with my father, the orderly wheeled him down to radiology and then parked his wheelchair facing a wall, and not directly at a wall, but diagonal to a wall, and away from the other people in wheelchairs, facing away. That's not the way you would orient a human in a human situation, that's the way you'd orient a box on a loading dock. And so that large system had created that moment for my father and for me. And so what do you need to change in a large system that it would create moments that are beautiful, that are life-affirming, that make us feel whole and alive? What would you have to change in a system to do that? And so I think that's a beautiful problem to work on. And it's the problem that I'm working on, which is, what do we have to change in our business models such that businesses become an engine? The creation, the design, and the delivery of the experience of work that makes us feel whole and alive. It's an artistic act, but it's not one that you can actually create those experiences hands-on. You do it indirectly by changing the system that generates those experiences. And that's exactly what I'm doing at 11fold.
Yeah.
And
makes me think.
I absolutely expect that is incomprehensible. So,
well, it makes
to many people.
In a micro way, it makes me think of, have you ever gone to a Cirque du Soleil at tent show?
Yes.
They're just so good at, you walk in and then they start to direct your attention. And before the show starts, they do like a warm up, and they use light, and some of the characters are running around, and it's just so thoughtful. Like everything, the costumes, the timing everything is just thought out in it's like clockwork.
Yes.
And I remember in a past life, in another role, in another job, I would just say to people, like, it takes no more energy to make something nice than to do something poorly.
Right.
It's just a matter of redirecting the energy in another direction. We spoke about your background as a writer and a reader. What stories do you think need to be rewritten in business? Like, what are a couple that might be top of mind for you as I ask you this question?
Well, I do believe that a part of what colors the experience of our work is the story that we believe we're in.
Yeah.
And so an example of that is, if I was in a steel room with steel walls, with a steel toilet and a steel bunk, and I knew I was in prison because people suspected me of committing a crime that I didn't commit, my experience of that room would be completely different than if I was in a spaceship. I was going to be the first person to land on Mars. And so the story that we are in changes our understanding of our environment and changes the meaning of our environment. And so the story that needs to be rewritten, there's many stories that need to be rewritten in business, but the one that I'm working to rewrite is the one that says, I am renting myself to you and for your benefit, as opposed to, we are working together to create value for both of us.
Yeah.
The teams that adopt the principles of multi-sided management, every member of the team is a leader, and they are all working together to support each other in terms of creating great work and winning great work. It's not tops-down, command and control, oppositional, take situation. It's a give situation where everyone is giving to everybody else, and in order to get what they want, they need to give to the customer. And so it's a much less oppositional, and it's much more collaborative, creative, and communitarian. And so that's a whole different genre of story than the version of, well, let's even more fundamentally. we have bought into the idea that we are things at work. And so how much of many people's, from kindergarten on up, education is about manufacturing themselves to be a better input to production in exchange for money. Parents are manufacturing their children for companies and are putting a ton of labor and a ton of money into doing that, as opposed to an alternative where people are not things that companies buy or rent, but instead people are becoming able to respect themselves as whole humans in a work context and expect to feel whole, not dead and dull.
Yeah. I mean, if I summarize what I'm hearing you say is going from this like unilateral power relationship to a relationship where it's more like an act of co-creation.
Yes.
Right, among equals.
Well, and there's another part of it, which is that people hire this product work for different things. They do hire it for the experience, and that would be a part of the experience economy. But they also hire it for transformation. I just said a sentence that didn't make any sense. I talk a lot about what do you hire your job to do for you. And so I've asked hundreds, maybe thousands of people, what do you hire your job to do for you? And so I used that term, which is that people do hire their job to give them experiences of work that make them feel whole and alive. But they also hire their job to transform themselves. And in fact, all work is transformative. All work makes the worker. And so that's the other part about work that is a part of the story that is wrong, which is a part of the story that's wrong is that work is bad. You have to pay me to do it. But that's actually not reality. Work is great when it's great work. And work is not just a simple thing where I receive the experience, but a part of the reason it's so co-created is that it's also transformative. And transformation is self-transformation, where you're the product at the end of the day, where you are the thing that's become changed, is hard work. And so it's much more co-created. So we've framed work very narrowly and wrong, work itself.
Yeah. I mean, I often think about just this notion of we become the stories we tell, and how we really need different stories in a number of areas of our life. But having said that, like, how might we develop stories about work that change the minds and hearts of people in leadership positions, so those people in power who enjoy the unilateral power relationship because it's comfortable and makes them feel important and a few other things? How do you think we can make a difference there in shifting the story that we're in?
Well, a part of it is, interestingly, I think we have a caricature of leaders. Leaders, founders, executives are not narrowly focused on money or power or self-aggrandizement. But they do get trapped in a system that causes them to focus on those things. And so there's a lot more diversity in what leaders want from work and executives want from work than we give credit. In the same way that people in leadership positions have to have a caricature of the people who work there to even just be able to grasp it. It's also true that we have a caricature of leaders when we're not in leadership roles. So I do think it starts from recognizing that everybody at every part of a company is a whole human and different from one another.
Well, are there any other perspectives or tools from the world of literature and writing that would make the world of work more enjoyable and valuable for people?
Well, certainly empathy. I mean, certainly empathy is one of those things. I mean, empathy is an artistic capability. I also think being able to... So, one of the changes that happens with multi-sided management is that the whole career conversation changes. And so it goes from one of, you're in box A, you need to go to box B, you want to go to box B, what skills do you need to acquire to get from box A to box B? And so that's a typical career conversation. But a multi-sided management conversation is a need-finding conversation. And so a need-finding conversation is, I'm going to ask you questions so that I can understand not that simple idea of getting from box A to box B, but what do you want from your minute-to-minute experience of work so that we can build a product that delivers those experiences together. And so being able to just appreciate the quality of the in-the-minute experience as opposed to thinking about some imaginary future where you can get from box A to box B and orienting and making all your decisions based upon that. This goes back to how you make decisions on a white page, which is, do you make decisions because you want to be someplace else, or do you make decisions in such a way that where you are right now is actually a great place to be? And so, and in fact, I mean, if you look at the design of things like houses, we design the experience of being in the room much more than we do the experience of doorways, which is much more than we design, because we don't live in the doorway, which is the moment of moving from job A to job B. That's the doorway, is that change. But we don't live in that moment. What we live in is in the rooms on each side. And so being able to observe and appreciate the room is an artistic capability.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it sure does sound like a way to add years to our lives. I mean, what you were telling me about these exit interviews where people just felt that they had not really accomplished anything, that they felt like bitter.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's heartbreaking if I put myself in their shoes. But I think we could, I mean, for me, part of this project is about making our work an engine for personal growth, right? And finding ways to borrow from the world of arts to make our labor like enchanting, like to make something enchanting for ourselves and the people that we're serving.
I like that word, enchanting. That's very nice.
Well, that's what, yeah. I were you ever like a Star Wars person back in the day, the original one?
Yes.
Or no? How old were you when that came out?
Yeah, I was in middle school.
You were in middle school. I mean, I was born that year in 77. But the first time I saw Star Wars, and I was like 5 or 6, my brain exploded. And I was like, I wanted to be Luke Skywalker. And I even get choked up now. Like the scene where he's like on the Death Star and he's driving the thing and Obi-Wan tells him like, no, just put that shit away and just use the Force to destroy this thing. And I thought about it for a long time, but it's something about getting in touch with that magical part of ourselves, the deeper truth of when you check in with yourself and kind of let that be expressed through our life. And I think we can kind of achieve that through work if it's designed right. So I really honor and appreciate the work that you're doing towards making that possible for people. And I think it's a very clever way to latch on to something that's co-opting the language of business and then accepting that, kind of transferring that to this other area of the organization of the large system to humanize work in many ways, and probably some other things.
Yes.
Well, thank you for the work that you do.
Thank you.
Really appreciate that.
I'm say just enchanted by the direction of this podcast that you are following, which is, I very rarely get to say the whole truth to the best of my ability about what I'm doing. And it's partially Because when you apply your weirdest self to solving problems, there is a translation gap. And you still can't be your weirdest self. You can leverage all of your weird greatness to solve problems. But when you need to move larger things, you still have to bridge the gap. And so you let me here talk about the weirdness at the center of what I'm doing in a way that I don't actually get to talk about it very much because it needs the translation layer most of the time.
Well, I think art helps us get in touch with the deeper truth when it's well done, at least. And that's what this space is for. It's about teasing out the deeper truth and looking around. So thank you very much for playing and for being forthcoming with that. I really appreciate it. Anyway, so we're reaching the end of our conversation here. We're going to land this plane. I just have a few lightning round questions, and then I'll open up the floor for you to share where people can find you. You ready for lightning round?
I'm ready.
All right. So first question. What is the last piece of media that you loved? And that can be a book, a movie, a podcast, or anything else.
There's a song called Tiger is Coming by Lindsley, which is K-folk music. And so it's Korean folk music with a great bass beat. And Korean folk music is closer to opera. It's really shiny. It's really fun. And it just so happens I was listening to it driving over here today. So that's the very latest thing.
All right. What is something that inspires you?
So much inspires me.
It's the first things that come to mind.
It's funny because I go to biology when I think about what inspires me. And I think of just extraordinary creatures and the things that they have evolved. It's the first thing that comes to mind. I actually use biomimesis as a tool a lot, which is to look at how biology has solved things and the lessons that we can learn from that.
That's wild, just how nature solves problems.
Yep.
That's really wild indeed. What is a song or band you must play during a solo road trip?
I switch between Tom Waits and John Coltrane.
Very nice.
But I'll tell you, John Coltrane, Giant Steps, best album of the last century.
Very nice. And last one, what do you want to see more of in the world?
I want to see less authoritarianism. And so the opposite of that, I think, is humanism.
Yeah.
And a part of authoritarianism, I believe, is objectifying people. And so a part of what I want to see more of is people being seen as whole humans.
Yeah. Indeed. Well, we have reached the end of our conversation here, Dart. Why should people look you up, and where can they find you?
After this conversation, I wouldn't expect anybody to look me up. Honestly. At the end of this conversation, my feeling is that although, if at the end of this conversation you do want to look me up, you're my kind of people. So
that's right.
That's really good news. People should look me up if they want their companies to be full of people who are whole and alive. And if they want to kindle a fire with both the traditional customer and employee customers. I mean, it is possible to do that. It's not very hard once you change your mental model. It's like one of these things where you change your perspective, lots of things become much easier. So that's what I would say. And I'm not going to use the easy pitch, which is solve your turnover problem. Sure, you will solve your turnover problem. But if you want to build a company that's on fire, that's alive, that's really the right reason.
Yeah. And where can people find you online?
11fold.com. That's 11fold.com. Best place to find me. Also, My podcast is Work for Humans with Dart Lindsley. I'm very proud of what we are creating there. It's one of the deepest conversations, I think, about management and people at work that there is.
Yeah, I'll second that. I like your episodes that I checked out so far. So it's very,
well,
very good.
And I say
conversation.
that not having known previously of your podcast. So I may have to say it is the second deepest.
It's a different flavor.
It is a different flavor. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
a different
different
flavor. I talk to a lot
Yeah.
of designers, and I talk to a lot of leaders, and I talk to philosophers and sociologists and poets and all different people.
As you should. Good job. Well, Dart, thank you so much for being on Making Business Hard today. I highly value you carving out the time, sharing your valuable time with me today. So thank you, sir.
Thank you.